Faith is often spoken about in moments of peace, when life is stable and the heart is calm, but that is not where faith is truly revealed. Faith shows its reality when it is pressed, when it is strained, when it hurts. Because anyone can say they trust God when the doors are open and the road is clear. The real question is what happens to that trust when the door slams shut, when the prayer feels unanswered, when the pain lingers longer than expected. Pain has a way of stripping things down to their core. It removes the layers of comfort, routine, and assumption, and it exposes what we are actually leaning on. Sometimes we realize that what we called faith was really certainty in outcomes, not trust in God. We trusted the plan because we liked where we thought it was going. But when the plan changes, when life takes an unexpected turn, we are forced to ask ourselves a difficult question. Was our faith in God, or was it in the version of life we imagined He would give us? This is why pain is not a sign that faith has failed. Often, it is the very arena where faith is being refined. When something hurts deeply, it doesn't mean God has left. It may mean that God is teaching us to hold on differently. Pain teaches humility. It teaches us that we are not in control. And that realization, as uncomfortable as it is often the first step towards sincere reliance. There are moments when the heart cries out, when the mind is filled with questions, when patience feels heavy and hope feels fragile. These moments do not make you weak, they make you human. Even the most righteous struggled when pain touched their lives. The difference was not that they were untouched by hardship, but that they refused to let hardship define their relationship with God. They brought their pain to Him instead of using it as a reason to walk away. Faith in times of ease is often inherited, assumed, and unexamined. Faith in times of pain is chosen. It is deliberate. It is intentional. It is when you wake up and decide, despite everything you feel, that you will still turn to God, that you will still pray, even if the prayer feels heavy, that you will still trust, even if understanding is absent. And this kind of faith, the faith that survives pain, is not loud. It is quiet, steady, and deeply rooted. It does not always come with clarity or relief. Sometimes it comes simply with endurance, and endurance, when chosen for the sake of God, is not passive. It is a powerful act of worship, because when faith remains after pain has done its worst, it is no longer fragile. It has been tested, and it has held. And that kind of faith changes everything. So if your faith is hurting right now, understand this. The pain is not the end of belief. It may be the place where true belief finally begins. When pain enters the heart, questions are inevitable. And for many people, those questions bring guilt. They wonder, if I were stronger in faith, would I even be thinking this way? But doubt in itself is not the enemy of faith. Silence is. The danger is not in asking hard questions. The danger is in stopping the conversation altogether. There is a difference between questioning God and turning away from Him. Questioning comes from engagement. It comes from a heart that still cares, still hopes, still wants to understand. Silence, on the other hand, often comes from resignation. It is when a person stops praying, not because they have no words, but because they have given up on being heard. And that is far more damaging to faith than any question ever could be. Throughout the human experience, sincere believers have wrestled internally. They asked why justice seemed delayed, why suffering felt disproportionate, why relief did not come sooner. These questions were not signs of disbelief, they were signs of honesty. A faith that cannot survive questions is not faith rooted in trust, but faith built on comfort. When comfort disappears, that kind of faith collapses. But a faith that brings its doubts to God instead of hiding them is a faith that grows deeper, more resilient, and more real. Doubt becomes destructive only when it is ignored or suppressed. When people are told that they must never question, they learn to suffer in isolation. They smile outwardly while their hearts quietly drift away. But when doubt is acknowledged and carried back to God, it becomes a doorway, not a dead end. It becomes the starting point of a more mature faith, one that is no longer naive but grounded. Silence is seductive because it feels easier. Talking to God while hurting requires vulnerability. It requires admitting confusion, disappointment, and even frustration. But silence requires nothing. It allows the heart to slowly harden without resistance, and over time, that silence becomes distance, not because God has moved away, but because the servant stopped turning toward him. Faith was never meant to be a performance of certainty. It was meant to be a relationship of trust, and relationships grow through honest communication, not rehearsed answers. When pain makes belief feel heavy, the solution is not to pretend strength, but to lean into sincerity. Speak, even if the words are messy. Pray, even if the prayer feels incomplete. Cry out, even if all you can say is that you are tired. God does not reject the servant who questions. He draws closer to the servant who refuses to disconnect. Doubt spoken is still a form of turning toward him. Silence is turning away. So if you find yourself questioning in pain, do not be afraid. Keep the conversation alive, because a faith that still speaks has not been lost. One of the most difficult realities to accept when we are hurting is that God does not always remove the pain right away. We pray for relief, for a door to open, for the burden to be lifted, and when it isn't, we begin to wonder what that silence means. But often, God's wisdom is not found in taking us around hardship, but in taking us through it. The pain we wish would disappear becomes the very place where transformation quietly unfolds. We are conditioned to associate divine help with immediate solutions. We expect healing to look like instant relief and answered prayers to look like visible change. Yet growth rarely works that way. Strength is not built by avoiding pressure, but by enduring it. And faith matures not when everything makes sense, but when it doesn't and we still choose to trust. In moments of hardship, something subtle but profound is happening beneath the surface. Patience is being shaped. Humility is being instilled. Reliance is being redirected away from our own abilities and toward God alone. These changes are not always noticeable in the moment, which is why they are so easy to dismiss. We assume that if nothing has changed externally, nothing meaningful is happening internally. But that assumption is often wrong. There are lessons that can only be learned in the valley. Compassion for others deepens when we know pain personally. Gratitude becomes sincere when ease is no longer assumed. Perspective shifts when we realize how fragile control really is. These are not lessons we would willingly sign up for, but they are lessons that stay with us long after the pain has passed. This does not mean that suffering itself is the goal, or that pain is somehow good. Pain is painful. It is exhausting, confusing, and heavy, but it can be purposeful when it is not wasted. When endured with trust, pain can soften the heart instead of hardening it. It can draw us closer to God instead of pushing us away. It can strip away illusions and replace them with sincerity. Often, we look back later and realize that the person we became through hardship is stronger, more grounded, and more aware of God than the person we were before it. At the time, we only felt loss. We didn't realize that something was being built. The waiting felt like abandonment, but it was actually preparation. God's work is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet, slow, and hidden. And that can be frustrating for a heart that wants certainty and speed. But the absence of immediate relief does not mean the absence of divine care. It may mean that God is doing a deeper work than the one we are asking for. So if you are in a season where the pain remains and the answers have not yet come, do not assume nothing is happening, because the faith that survives the fire is the faith that emerges refined. Faith is not built on understanding. This is a truth that becomes painfully clear when life hurts. We want explanations. We want clarity. We want to know why something has happened, why the suffering lingers, why the prayers feel unanswered. And when we do not get it, we are tempted to stop trusting. But faith, real faith, is not dependent on understanding. Faith is dependent on commitment. It is a choice we make when our hearts want to give up, when our minds demand reasons we cannot find. To choose faith without full understanding is not easy. It requires courage because it goes against everything our instinct tells us. Our instinct wants control, it wants certainty, it wants reassurance before it will commit. But God calls us to something different. He calls us to trust, to obey, to keep moving forward even when the path is hidden, even when the pain is present, even when our hearts are weary. That is the essence of faith when it hurts. Obedience in the absence of understanding is an act of courage, not weakness. It says, I may not see the whole picture, but I trust the one who does. It says, even if I do not understand why this trial is here, I will not let it define my relationship with God. This kind of trust is rare because it cannot be faked. It must be chosen repeatedly, moment by moment, decision by decision, even when feelings and circumstances urge us to quit. Many of us fall into the trap of believing that faith should make life easier. We think that if we are righteous, life should be predictable, safe, and clear. But true faith often leads us into situations that test us, challenge us, and stretch us beyond what we imagined. And it is in those situations that obedience becomes the proof of faith. Not the absence of hardship, not the immediate answers, but the act of continuing to trust, to pray, to serve, and to love, even when we cannot explain why life is the way it is. Faith without understanding also teaches patience. It teaches endurance. It teaches that our focus should not be on the temporary clarity of the moment, but on the eternal truth of God's presence. When we obey without fully understanding, we are practicing trust. We are saying that our loyalty and our hope are not conditional on what we see or feel, but on who God is and what He has promised. So even when life is confusing, even when pain feels unfair, even when questions linger, choosing to obey, choosing to trust, choosing to believe without understanding is the highest form of faith. It is a decision to stand firm, even when the ground seems unstable. It is a declaration that God is enough, even when everything else is not. And that choice over time becomes a faith that cannot be shaken. One of the hardest lessons to learn when life hurts is that pain does not always go away on our timeline. We cry out for relief, for the burden to be lifted, for healing to come, and sometimes it does not come quickly. And yet, in the midst of that suffering, there is a deeper truth. What wounds us can also refine us. What brings us to our knees can also lift us in ways we cannot yet see. Pain, when surrendered, can become purpose. It can become the very thing through which God shapes us, shapes our hearts, and even shapes the lives of others through us. When we go through hardship, it is natural to focus only on the loss, the disappointment, the ache. We want to know why this is happening, why life feels so heavy, why God allows certain struggles, but God often works in ways we cannot immediately recognize. The lessons embedded in suffering are rarely obvious at first. They are subtle, slow, and sometimes invisible to the eye. The patience we develop, the humility we learn, the empathy that grows in our hearts, these are the treasures that pain can produce. They are not consolation prizes, they are essential elements of a faith that endures. Surrendering our pain does not mean we stop feeling it. It does not mean we pretend it is not real. It means we take what is raw and painful and offer it back to God. We say, I do not understand this, but I trust you to use it. That act of surrender transforms suffering into something meaningful. It turns the moments that feel wasted into moments of preparation. It allows God to use what hurt us to shape who we are becoming. Pain can also become purpose when it is used to serve others. When we have walked through deep struggle, we gain insight and compassion that can never be taught in any other way. Our stories, our endurance, our lessons learned, they become a light for someone else who is lost in the dark. What once felt isolating can now connect us to others, giving their suffering context, giving their struggles hope. In that way, pain is never wasted when it is surrendered. It is transformed from a source of despair into a source of testimony, of strength, and of inspiration. The shift from hurt to purpose is rarely instant. It may take time, reflection, and faithfulness in the small, unseen moments. But every act of trust, every choice to hold on, every prayer uttered in the quiet of the night becomes part of the process. And in the end, when we look back, we see that what once seemed meaningless was actually laying the foundation for something far greater than we could have imagined. So when your heart aches, when your spirit is weary, do not let pain be wasted. Surrender it, give it back to God. Let it refine you, let it teach you, let it become a testimony that can carry meaning beyond the moment. And through that surrender, what hurt you can begin to heal you in ways you never expected. Faith is not always dramatic. It does not always look like victory, like miracles, or like the sudden lifting of burdens. Sometimes, faith looks like something much quieter and much harder. It looks like holding on. It looks like staying rooted when everything around you feels like it is falling apart. It looks like continuing to believe, continuing to pray, continuing to trust, even when your heart is heavy and your spirit is tired. And this kind of faith, the faith that survives pain, is one of the greatest acts of courage a human being can perform. When life hurts, it is tempting to let go. It is tempting to say, I cannot do this anymore, or God, I have tried and I do not see you. The instinct is to give up, to disconnect, to stop showing up in faith because the world seems unfair and the pain feels endless. But holding on is not passive. It is not weak. On the contrary, it requires strength, resilience, and a determination that cannot be taught in a classroom or learned from a book. It is forged only in the fire of struggle, in the midst of suffering, when every part of you wants to quit. Holding on does not mean you will immediately feel better or that your circumstances will change overnight. It does not guarantee that the burden will disappear, but it does mean that you are actively choosing trust over despair, hope over fear, perseverance over surrender. Every time you choose to stay, every time you choose to pray even when the words are hard, every time you choose to believe even when understanding is absent, you are proving the reality of your faith. You are showing that your trust is not dependent on convenience or comfort, but on something far deeper, on the one who never changes even when life does. Faith that holds on also teaches patience and endurance. It reshapes our perspective, showing us that strength is not always measured by what we accomplish, but by what we endure. It shows us that loyalty in difficulty is more meaningful than celebration in ease. Holding on is a declaration, even when it hurts, I will not abandon what is true. Even when I cannot see the end, I will not abandon the one who holds it. That declaration, repeated day after day, moment after moment, becomes a shield against despair and a testimony to the power of trust. It is also a faith that inspires others. When people witness someone who refuses to give up, they see more than resilience, they see hope. They see a living example that faith is not conditional on comfort or immediate answers. They see that belief can survive pain, that trust can withstand uncertainty, and that the human spirit can rise even in seasons of deep struggle. So when holding on feels impossible, remember this. The act of staying rooted, of continuing to trust, of keeping faith alive in the quiet and unseen moments, is itself a victory. Because faith that holds on even when it hurts is the faith that lasts.